I'd been going to my Uncle's old lake cabin every fall since I was a kid. It was one of those remote places tucked deep in the woods, far from any main road, the kind where you lose cell signal about 10 miles before you even get there. I used to love it. The smell of pine, the chill in the air, the stillness of the water early in the morning. But last October, that stillness felt different. I arrived just before sunset. The lake was glassy, reflecting the orange glow of the sky like a mirror. Across the water, through a thin mist, I could see the silhouette of another cabin. That one hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. My uncle never mentioned any neighbors, and for years it was just us on this side of the lake. But now, there it was. A small structure, faintly visible between the trees. I remember standing on the dock, trying to make out details through the fog. There was no movement, no smoke from a chimney, no light inside. Just stillness. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe someone finally built on the far side. The lake was technically public land. Still, it made me uneasy, the way it just sat there, half hidden, like it had always been there, waiting for me to notice. That first night was quiet. Too quiet, honestly. Normally, the lake had life. Frogs, crickets, the occasional loon calling out in the distance. But all I heard was the creak of the dock in the wind and the faint splash of water against the posts. It was peaceful, but not in a comforting way. More like the world was holding its breath. Around midnight, I couldn't sleep. The air felt heavy inside the cabin, like something was pressing down on it. I got up to grab some water and glanced out the window facing the lake. That's when I saw a light. It was faint, a soft, flickering glow coming from across the lake. The cabin that had been dark before was now lit by what looked like candlelight or a lantern. The reflection shimmered across the water, golden and steady. It should have felt normal. Someone awake on the other side, maybe reading or stoking their fire. But something about the rhythm of the light. It didn't look natural. It pulsed, like a heartbeat. I stood there for a long time, just watching. Then the light went out. Instantly. No fade, no movement, just gone. The darkness that followed was suffocating. I went back to bed, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Maybe the wind blew the lantern out. Maybe the person went to sleep. But even when I finally drifted off, I dreamt of that flickering glow, dancing across the surface of the lake like it was trying to draw me in. The next morning, I decided to check it out. I had a small rowboat tied to the dock, old but sturdy enough. The air was cold, mist curling off the lake as I paddled across. Halfway there, I realized how still everything was. Not even the sound of birds, just my oars dipping into the water. When I reached the opposite shore, I pulled the boat up onto the rocks and looked around. The cabin was right there, smaller than I'd thought, but real. Weathered wood, a sagging roof, windows clouded with grime. It looked abandoned, like no one had lived there for years. Still, I felt eyes on me. I stepped up to the porch. The boards creaked under my boots. There was a chair by the door, old, broken. A coffee cup sat on the railing beside it, half full, frozen solid. I knocked. No answer. The door was unlocked, but I didn't open it. Something about the air around that place felt wrong. Heavy. Charged. That's when I saw it. A trail of footprints leading down toward the water. Bare feet. The prints were deep, pressed into the damp soil, heading straight toward the lake. But there were no prints coming back. That was enough for me. I turned, got back in the boat, and rowed faster than I ever had before. I didn't look back until I reached my own dock. When I did, the cabin looked the same as before. Still, silent, like it had never been disturbed. The rest of the day passed without incident. I tried to distract myself by chopping wood and fixing the old generator, but the entire time I kept glancing toward the lake. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, not just across the water, but here. The air smelled different. The silence felt heavier, like something unseen had crossed with me. That night, I told myself I wouldn't look out the window again. But of course I did. It was around midnight again. I was sitting on the couch, half asleep, when I noticed a faint glow through the curtain. My stomach dropped. I didn't even want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. The cabin across the lake was lit again. The same flickering, pulsing light. But this time, there was movement. At first I thought it was just the shadow of someone passing by the window, but then I realized the shape was too still. It was standing there, right in the center of the window frame, watching. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it straight across the lake, and that's when I froze. Because the beam of light didn't just illuminate the far cabin, it hit glass, and in the reflection of the window, I saw my own cabin, my own window, and something, standing inside my living room, holding a flashlight too. The light hit me square in the eyes. I dropped the flashlight immediately and stumbled back, heart hammering. When I looked again, both lights, mine and the one across the lake, were gone. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the dark, every window locked, every sound amplified by my own breathing. Morning couldn't come fast enough. But when it did, I noticed something strange. Across the water, where that other cabin had been, there was nothing. No building, no dock, no path. Just trees, like it had never been there at all. I didn't sleep at all after that night. Every small creak, every gust of wind made my skin crawl. I kept waiting to hear footsteps on the porch, or the soft knock of someone testing the door. But all I heard was the quiet hiss of the lake wind moving through the pines. At sunrise, I checked the dock again, just to reassure myself that I hadn't dreamed any of it. The boat was still tied where I left it. The lake was calm. Across the water, nothing. Only trees reflected in the pale morning light. I almost convinced myself I'd had some kind of waking nightmare, that the long drive, the isolation, the cold air had messed with my head. But then I noticed something on my porch. There were wet footprints, small bare feet. Starting at the steps, leading straight to my front door. They stopped there, no prints turning around, no trail leading away. Just a dozen or so watery outlines pressed into the wood, as if someone had stood there, waiting. My chest went tight. I crouched down, running my fingers over the prints. They were ice cold to the touch, still damp, and smaller than mine. I backed inside, locked the door, and shut every curtain in the cabin. I didn't even go near the window facing the lake. I just sat at the kitchen table staring at the floor, listening for movement that never came. Around noon, I decided I'd had enough. I packed my bag, grabbed my keys, and started hauling my stuff to the truck. My plan was simple. Leave now, come back with someone else later, my uncle, a friend, anyone. But as I reached the edge of the dock, something caught my eye. A reflection in the water. It was faint at first, like a shimmer. But then I realized what I was looking at. There was a cabin in the reflection, my cabin, and across the lake, in that same reflection, was another one. Except when I looked up across the real lake, the second cabin wasn't there, only trees. The reflection was showing something that didn't exist. I stared for what felt like forever, the cold air biting my face. Then I noticed movement in the reflection. Someone stepped out of that mirrored cabin, slowly, barefoot, head tilted slightly as if listening. I looked up again, still nothing but trees. But in the water, the figure began walking toward my reflected cabin. Each step rippled outward. I stumbled backward, tripping on the dock planks. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I forced myself to look again, but the reflection had gone still. Just calm water. Just me. I don't remember going back inside. I must have just walked on autopilot, slamming the door shut and locking it. I sat there in the dark for hours, trying not to look at the windows, trying not to see my own reflection in the glass. That night, I couldn't resist checking one last time. I shouldn't have. The fog had rolled in thick and heavy, curling over the lake like smoke. I opened the curtain just a crack, my breath fogging the glass. At first, all I could see were shapes, trees, mist, and faint moonlight dancing on the water. Then something moved. It was standing on my dock. I froze. It wasn't close enough for me to make out details, but I could see the outline, tall, thin, standing completely still, just watching the cabin. At first, I thought it might be a trick of the fog. I blinked, and the shape was gone. But when I leaned closer to the window, I saw it again. This time, closer, not on the dock, on the porch. I jumped back from the window, heart pounding so hard it hurt. I could feel every muscle in my body trembling. My brain screamed to run. But where? Out into the woods. Then came the sound. 3 slow knocks. Wood against wood. The same rhythm I'd heard in my head all day. I couldn't move. I just stood there in the dark, staring at the front door. The knocks came again, this time softer. And then a voice, low, familiar. "Hey!" It was my voice. Exactly my voice. I couldn't even breathe. My knees gave out, and I slid to the floor, staring at the door like it would explode open any second. The voice spoke again, closer this time, right outside the wall. "You dropped something on the dock." The words were calm, almost gentle. I pressed my hands over my ears. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually the voice stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Thick, empty, like the whole forest was listening. I must have blacked out because when I opened my eyes, sunlight was spilling through the cracks in the curtains. It was morning again. Everything looked normal. The door was still locked, the dock empty, the lake calm. But when I stepped outside, I saw something lying on the porch. My flashlight. The same one I dropped that night, except it was dry, clean, and perfectly centered on the step, pointing toward the lake. I left everything else behind. I didn't even lock the door. I just got in my truck and drove, for hours, until the woods thinned and the radio came back to life. When I finally stopped at a diner off the highway, I looked back through the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. No cabins, no trees, just open road and pale morning sky. For the first time in days, I started to feel like maybe it was over. But then, as I reached for my coffee, I saw the reflection in the window beside my booth, and my heart turned to ice. Behind me in the glass, faint but clear, a cabin on a lake, and someone standing on the dock holding a flashlight. It was late October, the kind of cold that bit through your jacket and settled in your bones. I'd driven up to a national forest in northern Michigan for a quiet weekend alone. Just me, my gear, and the woods. I wanted to get away from the constant noise of work and people. I'd camped before, plenty of times, but this trip felt different right from the start. The air was heavy that evening, and the forest floor was damp with fallen leaves. I parked my truck off a narrow dirt road and carried my supplies about half a mile into the trees. The sun was low, glowing orange through the branches. I remember thinking how still everything was. No wind, no birds, just silence. When I found a clearing by a small creek, I decided it was perfect. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and lit a small fire as the sky darkened to that deep blue just before night. I cooked some beans, poured a small cup of whiskey, and tried to relax. That's when I saw the light. Through the trees, maybe 50 yards away, a faint orange glow flickered. Another fire. My first thought was that it was another camper, someone else taking advantage of the last mild weekend before winter. But the odd thing was, I hadn't heard anyone arrive. No car, no footsteps, nothing. At first, I felt comforted by the idea of not being totally alone out here. I even considered walking over and saying hello. maybe sharing a drink. But the longer I sat there, the stranger it felt. The fire was steady, bright enough to see from my spot, yet I never saw movement. No figure tending it, no shadow passing in front of it. Just a fire burning on its own. By 9 p.m., the woods had turned pitch black. My fire had burned down to coals, and that other glow was still there, unwavering. I decided to call it a night. I zipped my tent shut, crawled into my sleeping bag, and tried to fall asleep. It must have been around midnight when I woke up. I didn't know why at first, just that something felt off. My body went rigid before my mind even caught up. Then I heard it, a sound like slow, deliberate footsteps moving through leaves. They weren't close, maybe 20 or 30 feet away, but they were coming from the direction of that other fire. The steps would pause, then continue. A few more crunches, another pause. I held my breath and listened, every sense on edge. After a minute or two, the sound stopped. I couldn't see anything through the tent fabric, just faint moonlight outside. I told myself it was probably an animal, a deer maybe. But then came a different sound, the soft crackle of firewood, closer this time. I froze. It was unmistakable, the sound of someone dropping a log into a fire, just outside my tent. My heart started pounding. I hadn't built another fire. Mine had been dead for hours. I unzipped the tent a few inches, just enough to see through the mesh. The night was black except for one thing, a small, flickering orange light about 15 feet away. Someone had built another fire, directly in front of my tent. I whispered out, "Hello?" My voice cracked halfway through. No answer. The only response was the pop of burning wood. I could make out the faint outline of a person sitting there, cross-legged, their face turned toward the flames. I called out again, louder this time. "Hey, you okay?" No movement. That's when I noticed something that still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. The person wasn't sitting on anything. Not a log, not a rock. They were perched low to the ground, perfectly still, like they were balancing themselves unnaturally. And their head never turned toward me. I reached for my flashlight with shaking hands and flicked it on, pointing it straight at them. The beam hit nothing. The space where they'd been was empty, no figure, no fire. But the sound of crackling continued. I scrambled out of my tent, light sweeping across the clearing. My original campfire ring was cold and gray, exactly as I'd left it. The spot where I'd seen the new fire was just wet leaves and dirt. No ashes, no smoke, no footprints. Everything was gone. I backed toward my tent, scanning the trees, heart racing. The woods felt alive with movement, though I couldn't see a thing. Finally, I climbed back inside, zipped it tight, and kept the flashlight on. I didn't sleep again that night. When dawn came, I stepped out to pack up. The forest looked normal in the daylight, ordinary, quiet, harmless. I started rolling up my tent when I noticed something a few feet away, right where I thought that second fire had been. In the dirt was a perfect circle of blackened leaves, as if they'd been burned recently, and in the center of that circle was something small, a folded piece of paper. I picked it up, hesitated, then unfolded it. In shaky handwriting, someone had written 3 words. "Don't stay tonight." I didn't. I threw everything into my truck and drove straight home, barely breathing until I was back on the highway. That night, when I unpacked my gear, I realized I'd forgotten something. My fire starter, the one I always kept in my bag, was missing. I didn't plan to go back to the woods after that. For the next few weeks, I told myself I was done with camping. But the thing about fear is that it doesn't let you forget. It follows you home, sits with you in the dark, and whispers that maybe you imagined it. That's what started eating at me. Maybe the fire had been a trick of the light. Maybe I dreamed the note. My friends joked that I'd been too deep in the whiskey, and for a while I tried to believe that. But then, one night in mid-November, I came home from work and found something sitting on my front porch. It was my fire starter, the exact same one I'd lost in the woods. The same brand, same scratches on the metal grip, same worn paracord loop. I stood there in the cold, staring at it for a long time. There was no note, no sign of who left it. Just that small, familiar object lying dead center on my doormat. That was the first night I couldn't sleep at all. The next day, I called the local ranger station and asked about anyone camping near that area the weekend I was there. The man on the phone was polite but confused. He said that section of the forest had been closed for 3 weeks. There had been a small brush fire caused by a lightning strike. I asked what day that was. He said, October 10th. That was the exact night I'd been there. He told me the rangers had gone out the following morning to make sure it was contained. They didn't find any campers, but they did find a burned patch of ground and a tent that had been completely destroyed. He said it looked like it had been there for years. I didn't know what to say. My tent had been fine when I left. But according to the ranger, there hadn't been any fresh signs of human activity. No footprints, no tire tracks. Just one small fire pit full of ashes and a rusted-out metal cup. That detail hit me hard, because I'd brought one cup with me, and I hadn't been able to find it when I unpacked. I hung up the phone without saying much. The logical part of my brain was scrambling for an explanation. Maybe someone else had camped there years ago, and I'd stumbled onto the same clearing. Maybe the fire had revealed the remains of that old campsite. But then how did my fire starter end up on my porch? That night, I sat on my couch with every light in the house on. My phone sat on the table, screen glowing, as I tried to convince myself to call someone, a friend, the cops, anyone. But what would I say? Someone gave me back my camping tool? They'd laugh. By 2 a.m., I was still awake, restless. I walked to the kitchen for some water, and that's when I saw something through the window. A faint orange glow in my backyard. My heart dropped. I moved closer, pressing my face against the glass. It was the same kind of light I'd seen that night in the woods. Flickering, warm, rhythmic. A fire, right in the middle of my yard. I grabbed a flashlight and yanked the back door open, stepping out into the cold. The air smelled faintly of smoke, but when I shone the beam across the yard, there was nothing. No fire, no glow, just wet grass and darkness. Still, the smell was there, stronger now, burning wood, faint ash. I turned the light toward the tree line that bordered my property, and my throat went dry. Standing just inside the woods was a figure, same height, same build as before, motionless, facing me. I yelled, "Who the hell are you?" No response. I took one step forward, then another. My flashlight trembled in my hand. That's when the figure slowly raised its arm. It wasn't a wave, it was pointing at my house. Then, as the beam of my flashlight flickered, the figure was gone. I ran inside and locked every door, every window. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, I'd convinced myself to leave town for a while. I packed a bag, called my boss, told him I needed some time off. I drove to my sister's place 2 states over and stayed there through Thanksgiving. When I came home in December, my house was just as I'd left it, except for one thing. There were black footprints leading from the back door to the living room. They were faint, like soot smudges, each one perfectly spaced, as if someone had walked in bare feet covered in ash. They stopped right in front of my fireplace, and inside the fireplace, resting neatly on the grate, was another folded piece of paper. I didn't want to touch it, but I had to know. The handwriting was the same, uneven, shaky. It said, "You came back." I stood there staring at it until my knees started to shake. The fireplace was clean. I hadn't used it since last winter. But when I knelt down to look closer, I saw something deep in the ashes. A circle. Someone had drawn the same blackened ring of burned leaves. But this time in my home. That's when I realized something. It had never been about the woods. It wasn't the place that was haunted. It was me. Whatever I'd seen that night, whatever I had interrupted by setting up my tent near that other fire, it had followed me. It had marked me somehow. And now it wanted me to know it wasn't finished. I moved out 2 weeks later, sold the house, left most of my furniture behind. I never explained to the buyers why the fireplace was sealed shut with bricks and concrete. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I still think about that figure, about how still it stood, how it pointed toward my home like it was choosing me. And every so often, when I'm driving at night, I'll catch a faint orange glow in the distance, through trees, across fields, beside empty roads. I always tell myself it's just someone's campfire, but I never stop the car to check. I've spent most of my life hiking alone. It's my escape, my reset button. When I was younger, my dad and I used to camp in the Appalachians every October, right when the leaves started to change. The trails would turn into tunnels of red and gold, and the air smelled like cold dirt and rain. I loved it. After he passed, I kept the tradition going. Every fall, I'd take a long weekend, drive somewhere quiet, and hike until I couldn't hear cars anymore. That silence, that clean, heavy kind of quiet, always cleared my head. But the trip I took last year didn't feel peaceful. It felt wrong. From the moment I stepped onto the trail, the woods seemed off. The forest was thicker than I remembered. The trees leaned closer, branches clawing toward the sky. The colors were too bright, unnaturally bright, like the leaves had been painted red instead of turning that way. The air smelled strange, too. Not the usual mix of pine and soil, but sweet, like something rotting under the surface. I told myself I was just being sensitive, grieving again maybe. I'd been having a rough few months, long nights, little sleep. I figured a few quiet days would help. I set up camp by an old stream I used to fish with my dad. The water was low, the stones slick with moss, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear something like whispering wind through leaves, constant, low, almost rhythmic. I assumed it was just the breeze moving through the canopy. That night, though, it changed. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a sound that made every muscle in my body tense. It was my name, soft, drawn out, just Eli. At first, I thought I was dreaming. I sat up in my tent, listening. The forest was dead silent. No insects, no wind, nothing. Then, from somewhere past the stream, I heard it again. Eli. Not a shout, not a whisper, just calm, familiar even. The voice sounded like my dad. For a few seconds, my brain refused to process it. I hadn't heard that voice in nearly 6 years. The idea that it could be real was impossible, but there was something about the tone, the warmth, the weight that made my chest ache. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent. The night air hit me like ice. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and the woods were pitch black except for the thin beam of my light. I called out, "Hello?" My voice cracked halfway through. "Who's there?" No response, only the slow trickle of water over stone. I told myself it was the wind again, that weird rustling sound, and I forced myself to lie back down. But I couldn't sleep. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear faint movement just outside the tent. Leaves shifting, sticks snapping, like someone was circling the campsite. When dawn finally came, I packed my stuff early. I told myself I was just heading further up the trail for better views, but honestly, I just wanted to be somewhere else. Around midday, I reached a clearing I didn't recognize. There was a massive oak tree in the center, its roots knotted and twisting above the ground like a nest of veins. It looked ancient, easily 100 years old. At the base of the trunk, I noticed something carved into the bark. Not words exactly, but long lines, vertical slashes that formed a pattern. At first, I thought it was vandalism, maybe initials scraped out by someone decades ago. But when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't random. The marks formed a symbol, a simple circle with 3 lines cutting through it, like a crude sun. The weird part was how fresh it looked. The bark was still damp, like it had been carved recently. That same voice, soft, distant, carried through the trees again. Eli. This time, it wasn't behind me. It was below me. The sound came from under the leaves. I froze, scanning the ground around the tree. My first thought was that maybe there was a hollow underneath, like an animal den or a sinkhole. But the voice came again, slightly louder, from right beneath my boots. Eli, you left me here. My stomach dropped. The tone wasn't warm anymore. It was flat, heavy. I stumbled back, shining my flashlight at the base of the tree. There was movement, subtle, but unmistakable. The layer of fallen leaves shifting like something was crawling just under them. My rational brain fought to make sense of it. Maybe there was a raccoon or a snake, something disturbing the ground. But the whisper came again, and it was unmistakably human now. Don't walk away again. That broke me. I ran. Branches tore at my jacket as I sprinted through the woods, tripping over roots, catching myself on rough bark. I didn't stop until I hit the stream again. My lungs were burning, my ears ringing with the sound of blood rushing through my head. I dropped to my knees by the water, trying to convince myself I hadn't really heard what I thought I had. Maybe it was a trick of the echo, the way sound carries through valleys. But then I noticed something in the mud beside the stream. A footprint, not mine, smaller, bare. The edges still wet like it had been made minutes ago. And beside it, a second one, facing mine, as if someone had been standing there waiting for me to come back. I didn't go back to the clearing. I told myself I'd head straight for the car, stick to the trail, and get the hell out before dark. But the more I walked, the more I realized something was wrong. The path wasn't the same. It looked familiar in places. The moss-covered rocks, the tall birch trees. But the turns didn't match what I remembered. I should have hit the fork near the ridge after an hour. But instead, I just kept winding deeper into the forest. The light had already started to dim. The air felt colder too, like fall had suddenly slipped into winter. Every so often, I'd hear that faint shifting sound behind me, leaves brushing together, branches snapping. When I stopped, it stopped. When I walked, it followed. Not close, but always there, like a mirror of my own movement. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was just paranoia, an animal maybe, or my own echo bouncing off the trees. But when I finally stopped to drink some water, I heard it again. That voice. Only this time it didn't say my name. It whispered something else. Something that froze every nerve in my body. Go back. It came from ahead of me, not behind. I lifted my flashlight and scanned the trees. The beam caught nothing but trunks and fog, but I swear the sound had shape. Like it was moving through the mist itself. I didn't respond. I just started walking faster. Another whisper. Closer now. Go back, Eli. That was when I finally broke into a run. My boots slammed against the trail, the crunch of dead leaves deafening in the silence. I didn't care which way I went anymore. I just wanted to leave. After maybe 10 minutes of sprinting, the forest opened up again. Relief hit me like a wave when I saw the stream, the same one from the night before. My campsite wasn't far. Once I reached it, I'd grab my gear and follow the water downstream until I hit the road. But as I got closer, my relief turned into nausea. Someone had been there. My tent was collapsed, half covered in mud. My lantern, which I'd packed away, sat upright in the dirt, switched on, its weak yellow light flickering. And right beside it, pressed into the mud, were more of those bare footprints, small, uneven, dozens of them, all leading from the stream to the tent. I crouched down slowly, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I told myself it was probably some lost hiker, maybe a kid, maybe even someone pranking campers. But deep down, I didn't believe that for a second. Then I noticed something that made my mouth go dry. A small wooden carving sitting on top of my sleeping bag. It was rough, and hand-shaped, whittled from a stick, and carved into it was that same symbol I'd seen on the oak, a circle with 3 jagged lines cutting through it. I didn't touch it. I just backed away, shaking, trying to breathe through the panic rising in my chest. My mind kept repeating one phrase, "Get out, get out, get out." That's when the voice came again, from the trees behind me, but it wasn't soft anymore. It was right in my ear. "Why'd you leave me here, Eli?" I spun around, shining my flashlight wildly, but there was no one. Nothing. Just fog and shadows. But the sound didn't stop. It echoed all around me. One moment to my left, then to my right, then directly ahead. It wasn't my dad's voice anymore. It was using it, mimicking it, warping it. "Stay with me," it whispered. "Don't go back to the world." The ground beneath my boots shifted, and I realized the leaves were moving again, like before, in the clearing. Only now it wasn't a few feet away. It was right under me. I stumbled back, tripping over my tense ropes and falling hard onto the cold dirt. My flashlight rolled away, beam spinning. For a second, I thought I saw something move in that beam, pale, like a face pressed beneath the surface of the ground, eyes open and staring up through the thin layer of soil. I don't know how long I lay there, frozen. My brain refused to accept what my eyes saw. When I finally scrambled up, I grabbed my backpack, didn't bother zipping it, and just ran. I followed the stream, half in the water, half on the bank, until the forest started thinning. My legs ached, lungs raw from the cold air, but I didn't stop until I saw the faint orange glow of the parking lot lights through the trees. When I reached my truck, I threw everything inside, slammed the door, and peeled out of there so fast I nearly slid off the dirt road. I didn't look back. Not until I hit the highway, when my hands finally stopped shaking enough to breathe. That S when I noticed something on the passenger seat, a clump of wet leaves that hadn't been there before. I stared at it, heart hammering, until I realized there was something carved into one of the leaves. Not cut. Carved, like someone had scratched it with a nail or a knife. It was that same circle with 3 lines through it. I threw it out the window and didn't stop driving until sunrise. It's been almost a year since that trip. I haven't gone hiking again. I can't. I tried sleeping outside once in my own backyard, but woke up shaking at 3 a.m. with that same whisper in my head. Sometimes when the wind blows through the trees at night, I swear I still hear it. That low, rhythmic sound, almost like breathing through leaves. And sometimes, when I walk across my yard barefoot in the morning dew, I find footprints next to mine. Small, bare, facing me. When I was a kid, my family owned a small cabin in upstate New York. Nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms, a porch, and a long stretch of woods that seemed to go on forever. We didn't visit often, usually just in the fall when the trees were burning gold and the air smelled like cold earth and pine. Those were the best trips. The sound of leaves crunching under my boots, the faint smoke of someone's distant fire, the way my mom would hum old songs while Dad split logs for the wood stove. It felt peaceful, safe. But there was one rule my father never broke. No matter how relaxed he seemed, never go past the old fence behind the cabin. He never explained why. He just said the property line ended there, and the forest beyond was not ours to walk. As a kid, that kind of rule burns in your mind. I remember staring through the thin trees, wondering what could possibly be so different just a few feet past a rotted wooden fence. When I was 10, I tried once, just a few steps past the posts. The wood seemed the same at first, then strangely, quieter. Even the wind felt heavier, like it was being swallowed up by the trees. That's when my dad's voice cut through the silence, sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Get back here now." He grabbed my arm hard enough to leave a red mark. I remember the look on his face. Not anger, not exactly. More like fear. After that, I never tried again. Years later, after both my parents passed, the cabin became mine. I hadn't been there in almost 15 years, but last October, I decided to visit for a weekend, alone. I think I wanted to feel close to them again. Maybe I was just chasing a piece of my childhood that had faded somewhere along the way. The cabin looked almost the same when I arrived. Dustier, sure, but still standing strong. The porch creaked. The wind rattled the windows, and the smell of pine sap hit me the second I stepped inside. It felt like stepping back into an old photograph. I spent the first night reading by the fire, listening to the rain tapping against the roof. For a while, everything was still, peaceful. I didn't even realize how heavy the quiet was until I turned off the fire and heard the forest again. The whisper of branches moving outside, the soft rustle of something brushing against the wall. It didn't sound like wind. It sounded intentional. The next morning, I went out back to clear my head. The air was sharp, the kind of cold that wakes you up fast. The fence still stood there, barely. Most of the wood had turned black with age, and half the posts had sunk into the ground. I don't know what made me step closer. Maybe curiosity, maybe nostalgia. I wanted to see what my dad had been so afraid of. Up close, I noticed carvings on the old boards. Faint, weathered marks I'd never seen before. Circles, triangles, strange symbols overlapping like someone had etched them over years. And in the dirt just beyond the fence, something caught the light. A small, rusted tin can, half buried under moss. I don't know why I picked it up. Inside, there was a small piece of folded paper, yellowed and brittle. I opened it carefully, and my stomach dropped when I saw the handwriting. It was my dad's. 3 words, scrawled in shaky ink. Don't listen again. I stood there for a long time, just staring at those words. Again. What did that mean? When I looked up, I realized the forest beyond the fence seemed different now. The trees looked the same, but the space between them felt deeper, darker, like the world bent slightly past that line. And then I heard it, faint but clear. A voice, not loud, not whispering, just there. It sounded like my father. "Son," it said. I froze. The voice came from deep beyond the fence, exactly where I wasn't supposed to go. My breath caught in my throat. It sounded just like him. The same tone he used to call me in for dinner when I was little. Warm, familiar. But he'd been dead for 6 years. "Dad?" I whispered before I could stop myself. No answer. Then again, closer this time. "Come here, son." It was wrong, too slow, like someone remembering how to speak. I backed away, pulse hammering in my ears. The sound of leaves crunching came from beyond the trees, then stopped abruptly. That's when I heard something else. A low, drawn-out creak, like wood bending under weight. I looked down the fence line. One of the posts had started to tilt. Then another. The old boards trembled, and for a moment, I thought the whole thing might collapse. But it didn't. It just shifted, as if something on the other side was pushing gently against it. I turned and hurried back to the cabin, my chest tight. I didn't look back, but I swear I could feel that patch of forest watching me. That night, I barely slept. Every few hours I'd hear faint sounds outside, the crunch of footsteps, the soft drag of something brushing the wall. I told myself it was branches, or maybe animals, but each time the sound stopped the second I turned on the porch light. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. Only this time it wasn't outside. It came from the hallway. A soft, rhythmic creaking, like someone walking slowly across the old wooden floor. I sat up, holding my breath. The fire had burned out, leaving the room in near total darkness. The steps came closer, one at a time. Careful, heavy. When they stopped outside my bedroom door, I finally found my voice. "Who's there?" Silence. Then, from the other side, that same familiar voice. "Son, open the door." I didn't move for what felt like minutes. The voice outside my door, my father's voice, was calm. Too calm. "Son," it said again, the same way he used to when I was a kid. But there was something off. The pauses between words were strange, uneven, as if whoever was speaking had to think about how to sound human. My throat felt dry. "Dad." The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. The old wood popped in the walls, and the wind outside pushed against the windows. Then, quietly, "Please open the door." I stared at the handle. My dad was gone. He had been buried in a cemetery 2 hours away. I'd stood over his coffin myself. There was no possible way that voice belonged to him. Still, a small part of me wanted to believe it. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. Dead battery. I hadn't charged it since I got there. My flashlight, too, was sitting near the fireplace in the other room. The only thing between me and whatever was outside that door was a few inches of wood. The floor creaked again, moving away now, slow and dragging, like something heavy being pulled across the hallway. I waited until the sound faded completely before standing. My knees were trembling so badly the boards squeaked under my feet. I cracked the door open. The hallway was pitch black, except for a faint silver line of moonlight spilling from the living room window. I took one step forward. The air was cold, colder than it should have been indoors. Something smelled wrong too, like wet soil and rust. That smell pulled me forward, down the hall, past the old family photos that still hung crooked on the wall. My flashlight sat where I'd left it, near the hearth. I turned it on. The beam cut through the dark and hit something on the floor. Footprints. Dark, wet prints leading from the front door all the way to my bedroom. Bare feet. Too long. Too narrow. I followed the trail to the door. It was still locked. No broken glass. No open window. But near the threshold I saw something else. A smear of mud, shaped like a hand. The fingers were wrong, bending slightly sideways, like someone had pressed down with bones that weren't quite aligned right. I grabbed my keys and decided I was leaving. Tonight. When I stepped outside, the cold hit harder than before. The forest loomed, black and endless, the fence barely visible under the moonlight. Everything was silent again, not peaceful, but waiting. I tossed my bag into the car and turned to lock the cabin door, and that's when I noticed it. Someone was standing near the fence, a tall, thin figure, motionless among the trees. I could only see its outline, human maybe, but not quite right. Its head was tilted at a strange angle, and even from that distance, I could feel its gaze. It was watching me. I didn't move. I couldn't. Then slowly, the thing lifted its arm and pointed toward the cabin. Something inside me broke. I jumped into the car, slammed the door, and hit the ignition. The headlights came on, cutting through the darkness, and for a second I thought the figure had vanished. But it hadn't. It was closer now, standing in the middle of the clearing. Its face looked wrong, stretched, blurred by the shadows, but enough light hit it to show eyes, hollow and black. A mouth open just slightly, like it was trying to form words, and then it spoke, not loudly, not with lips, but inside my head. "Don't listen again." The exact words from the note. My father's handwriting flashed in my mind. The thing took one step toward the car. I floored the gas. Gravel sprayed behind me as I tore down the dirt road, trees whipping by in the headlights. Even when I reached the main road, I didn't slow down. Not until the sun started to rise behind the hills did I finally pull over. My hands were shaking. My phone had finally powered back on, and when I looked at the time, my stomach twisted. It was 3:17 a.m. The same time my father's death certificate said he'd passed away. I never went back to that cabin. I put it up for sale, but no one ever bought it. The realtor said buyers kept backing out after visiting the property, something about bad energy. A few weeks later, a small package showed up at my apartment with no return address. Inside was a small cassette tape and a folded note. The handwriting was mine. It said, "You heard it too." I didn't remember writing it. I didn't own a tape recorder. But against every bit of common sense I had, I played it. The tape began with static, faint and uneven. Then, under the crackle, came that same sound, the forest wind, the creak of the cabin floorboards. And then the voice. "Son," it said, almost gentle, "come home." I hit stop and threw the tape in the trash. For days afterward, I kept hearing things, faint whispers at night, the floor settling when it shouldn't. But worse than that was the knocking. Always soft, always from the window. When I finally worked up the courage to look one night, I saw nothing outside, just the dark reflection of my living room. But as I turned away, something flickered in the glass. For half a second, my reflection was gone. Standing in its place was a tall, pale shape, with hollow eyes and a crooked neck, smiling faintly, like it was remembering how to be me. I've since moved twice, changed jobs, changed numbers. I try not to think about the cabin, or the woods, or my father's voice. But sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear it, soft and low, whispering from somewhere far away. "Please open the door."